Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, meine Damen und Herren, sehr geehrte Schwule, sehr geehrte Lesben, sehr geehrte Androgyne, sehr geehrte Bigender, sehr geehrte Frau zu Mann und sehr geehrte Mann zu Frau, sehr geehrte Gendervariable, sehr geehrte Genderqueer, sehr geehrte Intersexuelle, sehr geehrte Weder-noch-Geschlechter, sehr geehrte Geschlechtslose, sehr geehrte Nicht-Binäre, sehr geehrte Pangender und Pangeschlechtlichen, sehr geehrte Transmännliche und Transmänner, sehr geehrte Transweibliche und Transfrauen, sehr geehrte Transmenschen, sehr geehrte Trans mit Stern, sehr geehrte Transstern weiblich und Transstern Frauen, sehr geehrte Transstern männlich und Transstern Männer, sehr geehrte Transmenschen, sehr geehrte Transfeminine, sehr geehrte transsexuelle Personen, sehr geehrter Interstern weiblich und sehr geehrter Interstern männlich.
Herr Abgeordneter, gestatten Sie eine Zwischenfrage?
Ich bin ja noch nicht mit der Begrüßung fertig, Herr Präsident. Entschuldigung. Sehr geehrte Interstern Männer, sehr geehrte Interstern Frauen, sehr geehrte Interstern Menschen, sehr geehrte Intergender, sehr geehrte intergeschlechtlich, sehr geehrte Zweigeschlechtlichen und sehr geehrte Zwitter, sehr geehrte Hermaphroditen, sehr geehrte Two-Spirit drittes Geschlecht und sehr geehrtes viertes Geschlecht, sehr geehrte XY-Frauen, sehr geehrte Transvestiten, sehr geehrter Crossgender, sehr geehrtes Nullgeschlecht und natürlich auch ganz herzlich die sehr geehrten sonstigen Geschlechter. Sehr geehrter Unterstrich Nonnemacher, sehr geehrter Unterstrich Bader und sehr geehrter Unterstrich Mus. Die AfD-Fraktion lehnt ihren Antrag ab. Danke.
Welcome to the 12th episode of the Sydney Contrarian, titled Same-Sex Marriage. After the feel-good wears down, everyone faces the inconvenient financial reality. The same-sex marriage bill has been a contentious matter in Australia, as has been in many Western nations over the past 3 years. Since the US Supreme Court declared on the 28th of June 2015 that same-sex marriage is legal in all 50 states, there was renewed vigour from the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans society, usually called LGBT, to push for this to go ahead in the remaining Western nations, that same-sex marriage should also be legalized in all Western nations and possibly around the whole world. Australia has been able to resist this movement up until now as a result of our former Prime Minister Tony Abbott holding a large majority in government in 2015. However, as a safeguard, he proposed that Australians be given the chance to vote on this as part of the next election campaign. Unfortunately, he was ousted by Malcolm Turnbull in September 2015. But Prime Minister Turnbull honoured the coalition party line and took the plebiscite, or a people's vote, into the next election, scheduled on the 2nd of July 2016, even though he himself is a vocal supporter for same-sex marriage. The coalition retained power with the thinnest of margins, and viewers can watch episode 5 for more details about this. On the 12th of October 2016, the proposal for a plebiscite on same-sex marriage was defeated in the Senate 33 votes to 29. The defeat was mainly led by the Australian Labor Party, the Greens, and certain few minority parties. Had the plebiscite passed the Senate, the Australian public would have voted on the 11th of February 2017. And who knows, the public may well have passed this already, since the topic of same-sex marriage was still well received, as information regarding the implications of legalizing same-sex marriage are not entirely made clear to the public at that point in time. In early August this year, 5 maverick members of the coalition government attempted to bypass the public vote and did propose a conscience vote in the parliament, but a party meeting held on the 7th of August 2017 resulted in this proposal being defeated. The coalition government again brought this plebiscite to the lower house, which passed, but it was again voted down in the Senate, this time on a 31 to 31 type vote. Instead, the Australian public would now be offered a postal vote on this matter, scheduled to be held between September to late October, with results out before Christmas. Senator Martin Cormann, the finance minister, announces that if the plebiscite results in a major majority votes against same-sex marriage, the government will block any attempts to change the definition of marriage. However, if the majority votes for same-sex marriage, a conscience vote will be conducted. It is expected that this will pass in both houses. The government estimates that the postal plebiscite would cost $122 million and will be conducted by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. The same-sex marriage debate is a divisive one with conflicts across both sides on the aspects of morals, freedom of speech, human rights, legal implications, biological definitions, social culture, and emotions. If I'm to cover every aspect, it would take me hours. Instead, I'll provide a more pragmatic perspective in this video that is not talked about much, and it is on pragmatism in terms of financial costs. I expect significant disagreement over my views, but this is understandable. I do, however, seek respect and civility from my viewers. To start off with, let us look closely into the bill on same-sex marriage, which is called the Marriage Equality Amendment Act 2015, proposed by Opposition Leader Bill Shorten. Currently, Australia is governed under the Marriage Act 2004 and the Marriage Act of 1961, where marriage is defined as between a man and a woman. Furthermore, an extra amendment of Section 88EA forbids the recognition of foreign marriages between a man and a woman and a woman. The reason for this amendment was due to the fact that a number of countries in Europe recognized same-sex marriage at the turn of the millennium. This fact is often challenged by the media, who is strongly for changing the definition of marriage and not explained to the public as to why Prime Minister John Howard proposed an amended Marriage Act in 2004. It has been misrepresented as a homophobic and cynical move by the left, and it should be pointed out that this is more an emotive statement designed to stir up emotions. The proposed Marriage Equality Amendment Act composes several key components. The first component is to redefine marriage as being between two people, thus removing the need for it to be between a man and a woman. The second is to remove Section 88EA so foreign same-sex marriages are recognized. Thirdly, the Act is subject to future amendments as appropriate. In other words, this Act can be redefined to validate any other unions that society and culture deems appropriate. Also, it provides limited protection to religious faiths against same-sex marriage by not compelling ministers of religion to officiate such ceremonies if it is against a religious faith. It, however, provides no protection to businesses or schools. It also removes all male and female gender terms and replaces it with gender-neutral terms. I dare say that the same-sex marriage campaign has done a smart marketing job in selling this as giving the rights for two people who love each other to get married, as if it is an obvious thing. However, the legislation runs deeper than this, as it redefines gender, and the fact that the Act can be further amended means the slippery slope is well and truly there. Those who deny it exists, and that will simply stop at same-sex unions, are either deceptively dishonest or are basically ignorant of how politics work. Now, the proponents of same-sex marriage will say that it is about giving the right for same-sex couples to get married and that many are waiting. Are there really that many couples that are at the edge of their seats waiting to get married as they claim? Let's look at some hard statistics. New Zealand has recognized same-sex marriage since August 2013. However, the uptake in same-sex marriages do not seem to be convincing. In an article published in early May this year, statistician Peter Dolan reported that over the year of 2016, 23,136 marriages and 60 civil unions were conducted. But of that, 954 were same-sex marriages or civil unions, and 471 of these were overseas. This implies that 4.12% of marriages were same-sex, and 2.45% of them were domestic. Now, this is a small proportion, and it can be seen from both the general population, as in the same-sex couples form a very small proportion of the population, or implies that the same-sex community is not really taking up same-sex marriage, as people have claimed. Now, looking at the Netherlands, one of the first countries to recognize same-sex marriage in modern-day society, having done so in 2001, we see that there is a significant disparity between heterosexual couples and homosexual couples getting married. 80% of heterosexual couples in 2013 over that period were registered as being married, while 20% of homosexual couples were married. The question remains then, the point of giving them equal rights is moot, since after they got them, they hardly exercise it. Now, that's not really my main argument. My main argument is that the implications of legalizing same-sex marriage in our society needs to be seen also from a financial perspective, and this one really matters. An article from News Corporation by Shannon Malloy, released not long after the postal plebiscite was announced, outlined how the $122 million that is earmarked for the postal plebiscite could be spent in other areas. The article derided the need for the plebiscite, but raises some interesting points. For example, Malloy pointed out that the Cancer Council offered $65 million for cancer research over 2016, and this would be at least half the cost of the postal plebiscite. It also pointed out that the $122 million could also get 4,560 nursing students to do the degree, and they may work in regional hospitals. Okay, that sounds very noble, but let's be pragmatic, Shannon. Not all nursing students want to work in regional hospitals simply because they are far away, and in order to incentivize them, you have to pay them more. Why didn't you count that one as well? Now, the article also highlights that 1,900 teachers could be employed on $64,000 salaries, which again sounds good, but if you look at the $64,000 salary, it's not very attractive if you consider that the rent in Sydney, for example, averages over $500 a week or $26,000 a year. It is also because of such low pay that leads to poor education, and our younger generation is more susceptible to being misled by languages and information presented in this article because they lack critical thinking skills. If you pay teachers peanuts, you cannot expect the sharpest people to take on teaching. So that one was a really bad point. The amount also was pointed out to be able to fund 677 medical students in completing the degree, or 2.7 million bulk bill doctor visits. Now, I hate to be so cynical about this article, but it is very left-leaning. The fact that the costs are discussed in terms of healthcare and education and equates more cash spent equals quality is very indicative of the political leaning of this author. It makes good propaganda, but it leaves so much to be desired in terms of a well-structured argument. Furthermore, the supporters of same-sex marriage are trying to tack any financial and emotional cost of this debate on those who are against same-sex marriage. As you saw, the tirade by opposition leader Bill Shorten on Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, that he holds Prime Minister Turnbull responsible for any filth that is thrown around in this campaign, is disingenuous at best, and it focuses on emotional costs of the debate against those who do not support their view. Without these activists pushing for change in the first place, the amount that is earmarked could actually be spent on creating jobs and providing training for people who actually need it. As for emotional costs, it is a collective thinking of these activists that are also placing emotional burden on those who they say they're campaigning for. The attention is being placed on these people, sometimes unwarranted, and yes, it can often be negative and hurtful, that's true, but also imagine the false hope that is placed and the disappointment that will arise should the Australian public decide against changing the definition of marriage. Thus, the projection of responsibility needs to be called out upon. Now, it is one thing to redefine marriage as being between two people rather than between a man and a woman. It is another thing to get society to adjust to this and accept it. But the same-sex marriage activists have taken it one step further already by including it in the school education. The Safe Schools Coalition made use of the Abbott government's Safe School program for anti-bullying to teach children gender theory and even inappropriate sexual education, and while receiving government funding for this. Now, the Victorian state government, led by Premier Daniel Andrews of the Australian Labor Party, has been the most ardent supporter among the premiers, injecting millions of dollars of funding into this type of initiative. Furthermore, even as the controversies of the Safe Schools program were made public by New South Wales Liberal MP Damien Tudorhope, the Australian Christian Lobby, the Marriage Alliance, and a Sydney mother, Dr. Pansy Lai, leading to government inquiries and eventually most state governments withdrawing funding and scrapping the program, Premier Andrews doubled down. This year, the Victorian state government set aside $30 million to support the LGBTI initiatives, including safe schools, preventing family violence against LGBTI individuals, anti-discrimination panels, and measures to help LGBTI homeless people. What is interesting to note is that the state government highlights that LGBTI people are disproportionately represented among the homeless and victims of family violence. Now the question comes down to why. If they're indeed normal members of society, which the activists say they are, and recognized as so, then what's handicapping them? But instead, the state government seeks to normalize them and use taxpayer funds to achieve this forcibly. And why should children be exposed to this at a young age when they're better off learning their reading, writing, and mathematics, given that we are already ranked quite behind leading Asian nations already in terms of our level of education? And here I make a blunt point. The issue of same-sex marriage is not as simple as one of tolerance, inclusion, human rights, and social justice. These are all appealing to emotions. The other side of the coin is of financial costs. The government will have to allocate increasing amount of funds should same-sex marriage be legalized, since it is about gender inclusion and integration. The potential for up to 248 new genders to be recognized means the government has to provide benefits for those who actually need medical assistance to maintain their gender identity or to change their gender identity. And this means government will have to charge more taxes or cut funding from somewhere else. Yes, there is no discrimination in this when it comes to taxing and welfare cuts. Whether you are for or against same-sex marriage, your wallet is drafted to pay. And the costs are only going to rise as people who have not contemplated changing their gender identity prior to legislation will do so, since the government is affirming this. Again, the slippery slope comes into play, and your cash is going to slide down this slope along with it. As Robin Edwards from Trans Health Australia notes, currently Australian surgeons are not equipped to conduct such surgical procedures, and reports of failures have actually been made known. Currently, those seeking to take on such operations need to fly to Thailand, and these costs can be quite prohibitive. If we legalize same-sex marriage, substantial financial resources will need to be allocated to train or hire surgeons over here. And again, everybody pays, or else other benefits have to be cut to cover it. Are most people going to get benefits out of this cost? You can have a guess. So, how much does it cost for an individual to undergo surgery to change their gender? According to an article by a transgender teen in the US, the amount is not modest and many people cannot afford it out of their own pocket. The initial surgery to change their reproductive organs costs above $30,000 US, facial surgery $25,000 to $60,000, breast enhancement $5,000 to $10,000, and hormone replacement therapy between $1,500 a year and probably a bit more. In Australian dollar terms, we are talking about well over $100,000 over the entire lifetime. Now, do you think they're going to pay for this themselves? Of course not. If the government legalizes it, the government will have to subsidize for it. I know that some of you will then say transgender people account for a fraction of 1% of the population and thus the cost is minor. Well, that's very present and short-sighted thinking. This is the same argument that's misused as a way to denounce President Trump in the US for his ban on transgender in the military. They claim that it costs currently the US Army $8 million to cover the cost of transgenders in terms of their medical needs. But the door is now going to be open if there wasn't a military ban, as people who want to be transgenders may actually join the army and get paid for it. People who couldn't afford it can now get government subsidies, so they will. And who will be paying for this? Would you think the government is going to go through the register and work out whether you voted yes or no when deciding who will pay? I don't think so. Now, moving along, I want to actually make a more general point to show how governments are one of the most inefficient means of solving problems, and from our historical experience, it's been a surefire way to ensure that you pay even more, even if you do not get back the benefits. And once the toothpaste is out, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So in my previous video, we have seen that the Australian government debt is projected to grow over $300 billion in the next few years. Legalizing same-sex marriage will open the door to gender diversity programs, more welfare expenses, and also medical costs. So we will pay what the government borrows if the tax revenue is not enough. Now, this is not an isolated incident. Here's a few more. Since 1985, when the Hawke government introduced negative gearing on investor properties, meaning interest payments in excess of rental income and tax deductible, it encouraged gradual property speculation, especially when banks reduced interest rate on mortgages and more people could access low-cost borrowings and push up the property prices. Now today, property prices have risen almost 700%, while income has actually risen no more than 250%. Living standards have hence dropped as a result, and people will have to borrow more and face a bigger bill in order to maintain their living standards. Now, the next two examples are more drastic and long-standing, and you have to bear with me in trying to see where I'm getting at. In December 1913, the US Congress managed to pass the Federal Reserve Act while most of the sitting members were away for the Christmas holiday, and thus the US Federal Reserve was born. The central bank's main role was to lend to the US Treasury and also to major banks in order to continue with their spending, with the US taxpayers being made to pay the interest and principal by the way of income taxes and other means. Yes, the US citizens did not pay any income tax until the formation of the Federal Reserve. And since the formation of the Federal Reserve, the US dollar's purchasing power fell some 96%. In other words, a dollar today bought 4 cents worth of goods and services in 1913. Sure, technology advanced and goods may be cheaper and living standards may have risen, but we work much harder nowadays thanks to inflation. And inflation has been so bad over this period that the US lost control of the financial system by the 15th of August 1971, when President Richard Nixon sought to protect the US gold reserves by suspending temporarily, what he called temporarily, the exchange of US dollars into gold and ended the gold standard. Now, this temporary suspension remains today, and the US dollar became so devalued relative to gold that gold is now 40 times the price compared to 1971, and at one stage was over 55 times in September 2011. Now, you might ask, why? Why does this matter in terms of gold price? It matters because you can actually measure the cost of everything relative to gold, and you'll notice that the gold's purchasing power has not changed substantially, whereas that of the dollar or the fiat currency that we use have actually risen substantially. It's weakened the purchasing power. You have to work longer to buy the same amount of goods. So one thing is certain: if the Australian government recognises same-sex marriage and thus recognises that there are more than two gender identities and that what your biological gender identity you came out with is not the same as your psychological gender identity, you're going to have to pay for it. And that cost will only grow and our living standards will fall further. You may feel good voting yes in the name of equality and human rights, but you are not off the hook with paying the bill. Think beyond one's emotions and consider the facts and also the impact on your wallet. Well, that's it from the Sydney Contrarian. Stay tuned for a future episode, and once again, God bless.